Hey everyone, I'm Jared Parks. I'm a course developer at Udacity, and we're here at AltConf 2016 to talk with some of the speakers and hear a little bit about them and just WWDC and all other kinds of things we'd like to chat about. I'm joined by Greg Raiz of Raiz Labs, and thanks for being with us, Greg.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So we're just getting introduced to each other. For everybody that's watching, could you give us a little introduction about yourself?
Yeah, so my background is in computer science, studied software kind of out of college, and worked in kind of product management and building products at Microsoft, and then really started my own company about 13 years ago building software. And it was really with the vision of how do you build a better world with better software and how do you build better technology. And so I started my company out of a coffee shop and just slinging code, and then company's grown. We're a little over 70 folks now and just having a lot of fun building apps.
So at Raiz Labs, what kind of apps do you guys work on?
So we work on kind of a really wide variety of things, a lot of both Fortune 500 companies where we're building web infrastructure, Android apps, iPhone apps, and we also work with a number of startups who are really trying to figure out what is the product market opportunity for them and helping them strategize around things as well. We also work with nonprofits as well, so we had a great talk about one of the projects we're doing with the Perkins School for the Blind, and so really wide range of things. We like to take on challenging problems.
That sounds really interesting. Can you talk more about the, you said, is this a bus stop for the blind?
Yeah, it was the Perkins bus stop app for the blind. We worked on an application to really try to solve micro-navigation, and so folks that are visually impaired can get roughly to the right spot for a bus stop, but they can't get exactly to the bus stop, and so buses end up driving right past them. So we've been working with them for quite some time, trying to figure out and prototype and explore these really interesting and challenging problems, so it's a lot of fun.
How exactly did you get started, I guess, approaching these accessibility concerns for that app? Did you work with blind people and try to...
We did, yeah. So that was, it's been a great collaboration. They obviously have been very helpful and available to us to solve those, but it's really going out into the field and doing usability and trying things out and getting better and better with products. And it's certainly very poignant with the Perkins project, but it's something that we try to do on all of our work, which is validate the things that we're trying to do actually work with real users. And it's so simple, a lot of developers forget. I was chatting with someone here today at AltConf, and they had built a game and it was cool and they showed it to me, and I was like, you should show your friends, but don't tell them how to use it, just give it to them. And it's that simple active observation that helps you see their frustration and their pain point and make it better.
Absolutely. So I imagine then that maybe one of the exciting announcements was the Siri SDKs for you guys. Like that seems like a way to really address accessibility.
Well, it's, with Apple announcements, it's always like there's some things that are exciting and there's some things where like a little bit of wait and see. And so I think the fact that Apple is opening up Siri is super exciting, and I think it'll create a bunch of opportunities for voice integration and interaction. I think as their developers are digging through the SDKs and the APIs, they're finding there's some limitations. But again, it's early for Apple to announce stuff, and so what we've seen with DubDub, like they announce stuff and it evolves and shapes, and so we're psyched that some of that, like the door's been opened a little bit, and we want to get our foot in there and get the door open even wider.
Besides Siri, is there another announcement from yesterday? Is something that excited you personally?
There's a lot of developer things that I think are interesting. There's speech recognition, and so some APIs for speech recognition. I think there's some things that are being opened up on Apple Watch, which are interesting and are going to create deeper engagements on the watch. It's a number of extensions and plugs into the mapping infrastructure that are pretty interesting, and also a number of plugs into the messaging protocol and how iMessages works that whenever Apple announces a bunch of stuff, it's always fun to kind of like, well, what are the new apps that are now possible that weren't possible a year ago? And so there's always really neat opportunities. And kind of when I think about the apps that have been released over the last year, you kind of have to, oh yeah, like these emoji keyboards that are now popping up all over the place were because last WWDC they announced keyboard extensions and all of those things. So it sometimes takes a little while, but it can be really transformative.
So you mentioned the watch. At Raiz Labs, do you guys work on all different Apple platforms, or you stick with just one?
Yeah, we try to be fairly platform agnostic, and that goes not just for mobile devices, but for the web as well. And so we really believe in building great technology, and so we're not like just for iOS devices. We think about Apple, we think about Android, we think about HTML5, we think about responsive web, we think about the APIs as well. And it's really, how can we have the biggest impact through technology?
How do you approach that from like a development standpoint? Do you use shared frameworks? I think that's a process a lot of our students kind of eventually get to. Like, how do I share my code between the Watch app and the iOS app?
Yeah, I mean, across iOS devices, it's much easier to share code and frameworks and things like that. So Apple Watch, iPad app, iPhone app will share a lot of technology. I think there's still some challenges on sharing technology from an Android project to an iPhone project. And so there's a number of explorations that we've been taking, a bunch of other companies have been taking to try to figure out, like, can we cross-compile Swift? Can we do other things to make that process easier?
Yeah, it also seems like there'll be concerns data-wise how you could share between the two platforms. Google just announced Firebase as kind of an option for persisting things that'll be accessible to iOS and other types of apps. Do you guys go with CloudKit, Core Data? What do you guys use for?
I mean, it's really dependent, more heavily on the client and the project than anything else. A lot of our products are enterprise grade, and so they're for these large companies. And so the data warehousing has to often be in their cloud or their infrastructure, and so it's really coding to their APIs and things like that. I think both Firebase and other backend as a service platforms are really empowering for certain types of products, but not everything's the same, so we have to kind of like dissect it. And if you're trying to share data across two iOS devices, then Core Data is fantastic, and cloud, it's very easy. But if it's a requirement to share between iOS and Android or other things like that, you have to kind of think about APIs or servers or how we're going to do that.
Now at Raiz Lab, do you manage code bases that are in both Objective-C and Swift? What does that look like?
Yeah, we did a transition probably around the new year where Swift had gotten to a level of maturity where we really felt like we could build full production enterprise apps on top of it. And so around the new year, we really transitioned, said any new project is going to be a Swift project. We still have Objective-C code bases that we'll maintain and update as they need to, but for new modules or new larger sections of those products that are being built, they're being re-architected and rewritten in Swift.
And would that also be extended to new learners? Would you recommend Swift as the first language as opposed to Objective-C or something else?
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I'm a big fan of Quora, and one of the most popular questions I have on Quora is, what should new beginners learn? Is it Objective-C or Swift? And I wrote the answer, I want to say, like 2-3 years ago, and back then the answer was absolutely learn Objective-C, because Objective-C 3 years ago would put you ahead of anyone who just learned Swift. To some extent, that might still be true, because there's a lot of low-level knowledge of the Objective-C that's very helpful, but we've gotten to a level of maturity of Swift that you can really be Swift first and really be on fairly equal footing with everyone else. So I don't view it as a disadvantage at all anymore. And so yeah, if you're a new learner, like, jump in feet first with Swift. I think I was super excited to see the Playgrounds thing that Apple announced, and I think that's just another kind of indication that Apple's betting heavily on Swift, and they want it to be the predominant learner platform. And honestly, I've never seen any type of learner platform like what they demonstrated. I think it was really revolutionary.
Yeah, so Swift's obviously open source now, and there's stuff coming out for Linux, other talk about Swift web frameworks and stuff. Have you been following any of that discussion?
We have, and I mentioned this, we've been exploring whether we can cross-compile Swift onto Android to write some of the business logic or share some of that business logic. A couple of my guys have been playing around with Swift on the server and trying to see what we can do there. I definitely think as a developer, there's a natural itch of like I don't want 9 different languages. And in terms of companies trying to have that unified language, it's been tried in a couple places. Java certainly tried it. JavaScript has tried it, and I think Swift is a natural one to try it as well.
So there are so many facets of mobile development. Is there one in particular that you really like to focus on, that you enjoy working in?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually just today gave a talk on that, and for me the thing that I'm really passionate about is how designers and developers can work better together. In my work I've seen a lot of different projects where designers spend a ton of time making something beautiful, and then it's hard to carry that beauty into the actual implementation. And likewise, I've seen people obsess over algorithms and how a particular product is built, but then they don't spend enough time on the user interface, so all the depth and complexity that they have in that power isn't actually expressed or visualized or used. So it's really, I'm passionate about how do you connect those dots, how do you get designers and developers working, collaborating, and speaking each other's language, because I fundamentally think that's transformative and builds better products.
We have a student question that's just about that, and assuming that the design and development culture is something we're wanting to unify and kind of bring together, why doesn't it always happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, and one of the reasons it doesn't happen, and there are several reasons, is that designers and developers speak a slightly different language, and so when you talk about things like consistency or balance, affordances, things like that, those might be design phrases that mean a particular thing. If you talk about consistency or object models or frameworks or APIs, that's a very developer-centric language, and so designers and developers have to understand each other and what they mean, what their intents are, and so I often recommend to developers when they're looking at a particular design not to just look at the pixels that are represented on the composition, but to ask the questions of what is their intent, like what are they really trying to do, and why this versus something else, because designers try to make things usable and beautiful and practical. But sometimes they don't represent what's not on the screen. Like, what happens when the list is blank? What happens when an error condition happens? What happens when you hit a timeout on a server? What happens if you're not on Wi-Fi? What happens if you have two items that are named the same thing? Are they alphabetized? Are they systematized? How are they sorted? And those are the little subtle details of when things don't go right. The hard part of user interface design is designing for things that go wrong, and how does it go wrong, and how does it recover? And so having those conversations and facilitating that communication between designers and developers, I think it does lead to better products.
At Raiz Lab, is there a particular way that you get your designers and developers integrated into that process quickly? Do you guys start from like the ideation phase of an app, like with both teams there ready to work, or you kind of bring in just...
Yeah, we definitely, at the beginning of a project, we do ideation or brainstorming together, and so it's, and I have been at companies and cultures where the designers design completely in a vacuum outside of development, and I think it's incredibly problematic because you're designing something without really understanding how it's going to be built, or seeing the opportunities of how the technology can be used to do things that designers weren't even aware of. And so we all get in a room, designers and developers as equals, and everyone picks up a marker. It doesn't matter if you can draw or not. We make product managers do this as well. We bring our clients into the room, we make them do it as well, because it's not, everyone can draw boxes and arrows and buttons and things like that, but by articulating what these apps could look like or what's important to them and why those things are important, it helps create that brainstorming culture. It creates that we're on a level playing field and we're on the same team. It's not designers versus developers. It's, well, I'm going to design the best thing, you're going to build the best thing, but only together. It's not independent.
At some point, do you take all the creative ideas and energy from those meetings and whittle it down to the core focus on an app? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, our typical process is agile based, and so we work in 2-week sprints. And so we'll start with that initial ideation phase where we're doing a lot of blue sky, a lot of broad strokes. It could be something like this, and then day by day, week by week, we whittle it down to things that we're like, okay, we can build that. That's doable. And so it's great to start with blue sky, like big dream, what can it be? And then take a step back and be like, okay, what's going to impact the users the most? And what can we do in the time frame that we have? And how do we make it awesome within that time frame?
Absolutely. Is there a particular piece of advice for somebody that's just wanting to get into development that you would really want them to stick with going through that could be helpful to them?
I would say have fun with it. Like, I think the reason that I love development is because it never felt like work. It felt like playing with Legos. It was like there are these little bricks and I can attach them and get them to light up over here or move this thing over here. And the element of play and fun being injected into the products that we build make for better products. It makes our products human. It doesn't make them mechanical. And so we do that just in general. We try to inject a little bit, and we call it hacking. Hacking has negative, positive connotations, but for me, it's coding creativity. Like, you can't tell a developer be coding creative, but you can tell them to hack, and that's kind of what it is. It's a lifelong habit for developers to have passion in their craft of coding, and it requires them to have fun with it and experiment and try things and be willing to fail and be willing to throw something out and try it over again, and it makes it fun, it makes it engaging.
What would your advice be to somebody, and this happens, I imagine, to most anyone, when they get started, there are a ton of roadblocks you're going to hit, problems you can't solve, and still being able to find the fun, find the creativity when times are tough?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a little bit of perseverance in trying things, and being frustrated is okay. Like, that's part of learning, and I think recognizing that it's part of learning allows you to get past it. And so for people who are new or trying something that they've never tried before, finding small challenges, things that are not these giant boil the ocean, I'm going to write this multiplayer game with servers and components. It's like when we had an intern join Raiz Labs, and this was the very early days of iOS. I gave the intern a challenge. He now heads up my San Francisco, Oakland office. But the challenge was write a one-page iOS app. It can only have one screen. It has to do something useful, and people have to be willing to pay 99 cents for it. And so, like, he thought a lot about the problem and how to do it, and simplified and simplified. And at the end of the day, it was a simple calculator, but it allowed him to overcome some of the unknowns, like, oh, I don't know how to create a UI view or a label or a thing, or how to bring up a keyboard or a number pad. And you build on these little building blocks little by little by little, and then you get something amazing. So start with something small, don't get frustrated, enjoy the small successes and build on top of those.
It sounds like it could be a great Udacity project, actually.
It could absolutely be a great Udacity project.
Has there ever been a problem, or if you could think of one, what is the hardest problem you've had to solve as a developer?
Yeah, the hardest problem in software is people. And the reason I'm passionate about design and development is because a lot of the very hard problems in computer science are now about the human element. The reason you're seeing things like Siri and voice is because the voice and the human expression is so much easier to express that, I want to go to a restaurant at 7 o'clock, and what are the places nearby that have Chinese? Doing that in UI is very hard. Expressing it in voice is incredibly easy. And I'm super excited about how we can solve those challenges through the human element, through user interface and user interaction.
So, Greg, if you could give just another piece of advice to developers, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important for folks to really get immersed in their craft and really practice it and have fun with it and do a lot of it. The notion of becoming a great developer is as much about habit and practice and figuring this stuff out. And I'm a big believer in Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours, and so it really just takes passion, determination, and a lot of hard work. But in the end, it's a lot of fun.
Thanks so much for being with us.